because they believe there was something underneath this mosque. The Masjid of Allah being treated in such a way. And this is the same thing that they want to do to Masjid Al Aqsa today. Yeah, you find them humiliating the Palestinian people. Now, as a Palestinian, they can't even cross over into their own lands. Their lands are blocked, their borders are blocked. So, those who grow, those farmers that grow apples and oranges or dates, because of the borders they put, this wall they put around Jerusalem and the West Bank, they can't actually export any of their goods. So you find Muslims are starving. They don't even have water, clean sanitation, proper water they can use to drink or to clean themselves with. They don't have access to medical supplies and medical aid. And all of this is because of the Zionist Jews. And there's many things that we can go on to talk about what's going on. But I'm sure you all remember what happened in Gaza last year. I'm sure many of us went on these demonstrations and we were angry when we saw what they were doing. Yeah? I don't know if you remember, I saw a couple of pictures. And this again, if you look through history, do a Google search. I remember there was a young boy, this was many years ago, before the Gaza war. There was a young boy hiding behind a wall with his father. Yeah? And you had Israeli snipers shooting at Muslims. Yeah? And they could clearly see here was a father trying to protect his son behind a small wall. And what did the Israeli snipers do? You think they showed mercy? You think they showed compassion? What did they do? They deliberately targeted this young boy. Deliberately targeted this young boy. And the list of humiliating actions that the Muslims of Palestine have to go through is too many. It's too many. And it's so sad, we'll probably spend more time just thinking about how humiliating a situation this is for Muslims. So I don't want to go down that road, but it's enough for us to understand what the situation in Palestine is. And then we ask ourselves, and everyone, when this Gaza war was going on, everyone's demonstrating, everyone was saying, what do we do? Why doesn't the world do anything? Why doesn't the world help these innocent people? How can you fight a big army? How can they fight a population of people that don't even have a gun? They have to have young boys going away throwing stones at tanks and helicopter gunships. Why doesn't the world do anything and stand up and defend the Palestinian people? Yeah? And I'm sure we all went on the demonstrations and we raised our voice. And what the shocking thing is that sometimes, we look to the West, we look to America, and we look to Britain, and we say to the British government, why don't you help the Muslims of Palestine? We look to the Americans and we say, why don't Americans help Palestine? We should stop buying clothes because, they sponsor Israel, and we should stop going and buying clothes from Marks and Spencer's. Not that anyone of you guys would buy clothes from Marks and Spencer's. We should stop buying clothes from Marks and Spencer's because they give money to Israel. But you know what the reality is? And this is the sad fact that we need to face up to. The reality is, it's the Muslim world that actually keeps Israel where they are. And I've got some facts I want to discuss that actually shows that Israel is only able to exist today because of our Muslim governments and because of these Arab governments that support it. And what's the first piece of evidence I give to prove this? In the year 2000, Turkey signed with Israel what's known as a free trade agreement. Yeah? If you do a search on this in the internet, what does this free trade agreement mean? It basically says that Turkey and Israel will build a pipeline. So Turkey can, through this pipeline, supply water, electricity and gas. Yeah? So here's a Muslim country building a pipeline to go into Israel, a country that's occupying Masjid Al Aqsa, killing your brothers and sisters, and this country, Muslim country, is saying we're going to supply you water so you can feed yourselves and you can drink, oil and gas so you can fuel your planes and fuel your gunships and your tanks in order to go and kill Muslims in Gaza and the West Bank. Not only that, they're saying, we're going to sign a joint military treaty where we're going to have military cooperation, where the Turkish military and the Israeli military are going to do joint exercises together. Like as a footballer, or you do some training, maybe those that do boxing or you do martial arts, you do training and you spar with partners to keep yourself fit. So when it comes down to the match, you're ready to go for it. Yeah, and in a similar terms, this is what militaries do as well. They have training sessions, training exercises, so they can practice firing their weapons, they can practice their missile firing, they can practice driving their tanks. Yeah, who does Israel do this with? Turkey. Yeah, the former capital of the Khilafah is now helping the Zionist Jews, in Israel. Basically, we're going to help you, and we're going to help you and train you and learn how to drive your tanks, so that you can drive your tanks over the bodies of Palestinians. We're going to help you fly your gunship so you can point your gunship guns at the Muslims in their houses. So it's not only Turkey. Let's look at some other examples. In Egypt, in 2005, again this information is freely available on the internet. Egypt signs a $2.5 billion deal with Israel to supply natural gas. So here's the Egyptian government, right next door to Palestine, Israel. And if you remember, Egypt's actually on the borders with Gaza. If you remember when the Muslims in Gaza were trying to escape from the war, what did they do? They tried to go through tunnels, isn't it? They tried to go through tunnels into Egypt. And here you got a government that's basically saying to Israel, you go kill your Muslims, you go kill Muslims, you go break Masjid Al Aqsa, and we're going to supply you natural gas so you can do it. So basically they sold Masjid Al Aqsa for the $2.5 billion. That's how much it was worth for them. What else do you find? In 1994, the GCC, Gulf Cooperation Council, it drops its 47-year ban in dealing with Israel. Yeah. So what does that mean? Gulf Cooperation countries are, countries that exist in the Gulf. Like Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Kuwait, Qatar. Yeah, they have an organisation called the GCC, Gulf Cooperation Council, and they made an agreement. Yeah, that they said they're not going to deal with Israel. They're not going to supply anything to Israel. But in 1994, they said, you know what? We need to drop this treaty now. So we're going to supply Israel with food, water, clothes, whatever we want. So we're going to help arm, and we're going to help clothe, and we're going to help feed the very same people that are killing and destroying Masjid Al Aqsa. In 1993, Qatar signs a multi-billion deal with Israel. And you know what? The list is so long. I've just, there's too many examples to show that the very same people who keep Israel and keep these people in their place and supply them with the gas and the oil so they can go and destroy Masjid Al Aqsa is actually Muslims themselves, these Arab governments themselves. And this is how blatant it is, where you got an Israeli minister. You know how arrogant these Israelis are. You actually have an Israeli minister who comes out, and he's the Minister of National Infrastructure, and he said in a statement, he goes, Israel's situation is complicated. We don't have diplomatic relations with most of the countries which we import oil from. Yeah? What does that mean to us? They're basically saying we don't actually have official relationships with countries who actually export oil to Israel. Now if you do a little bit of digging, actually find, okay, what countries don't have official diplomatic relations with Israel? Surprise, surprise, who would you probably find? All the Arab governments. Saudi Arabia, Dubai, UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, not Qatar anymore, they sold out a long time ago. But all of these countries, they basically say we don't have official relationships with a country. Yeah. So in other words, what they say, if we don't have official diplomatic relations with a country, we don't really deal with Israel. And here, this Israeli minister is basically saying that we don't actually have diplomatic relationships with most of the countries we'll import oil from. So in other words, most of the oil that Israel imports actually comes from where? Places like Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. This is effectively what he is saying. Yeah. And likewise, it's also the other way around as well. It's the Arab governments who actually import stuff from Israel. So you find in Saudi Arabia there was a massive hoo-ha that took place a few years ago because why? Medical supplies that were imported that they were using in hospitals were actually made in Israel. So things like hypodermic needles and scissors and rubber gloves and things like that, when people actually looked at a lot of these things, they're actually made in Israel. So it's also the other way, that Arab governments are buying stuff from Israeli companies, yeah, and then using them in their own country. So again, you're helping the Israeli companies. And what do you think they do with this money? Obviously they go and they fund more killings and buy more weapons so they can kill more Muslims. So the reality is, it's like I'm giving oil, I'm paying for this brother here, I'm giving him petrol with his car, I'm giving him gas and I'm giving bullets, and I'm saying, you can go and kill my brother. We're actually arming the same people who are actually coming back and killing Muslims. So the question we need to ask ourselves, you want to solve Israel and you want to solve the Palestinian issue. How do you do it? We don't need to boycott Coke and we don't need to boycott Marks and Spencer's. The reality is our Muslim governments are actually supplying Israel with the very same resources it needs to survive. What would happen if we was to switch off the taps of water? Yeah, what would happen if we stop supplying water to Israel? What do you think